Fire Mage is one of the most powerful and flavor of the month specs in patch 8.3. This has caused a knee-jerk reaction from Blizzard in the Shadowlands alpha to heavily nerf the spec. But is this warranted? And what exactly makes this burst AoE Cleave spec the powerhouse that it is? I'm going to walk you through a baseline Fire Mage and slowly add all the borrowed power systems from BFA and show you that without these extra sources of power, the baseline spec is fundamentally broken and unworkable. Okay, what we're going to be focusing on is the combust window. This spec is all about stacking as many buffs and cooldowns as possible into the combust window to stack a large ignite on the boss and let that spread to adds around them for massive AoE burst damage. But before we do that, I want to explain my UI so you have a good understanding of what's happening when we're actually showing off the actual gameplay. So to start out here, I have my action bars down here. You don't need to look at any of this. My health bar here, obviously. All you need to look at is this little center here. We have the cooldown on Combust. We have the cooldown on my Rune. The cooldown on my Meteor. We have my Fire Blast charges. And then my Trinket here. Now, if we jump down to the target dummy here, when we enter combat, you can see that my cast bar is right here. And then when I pop these cooldowns, they're going to appear over here and over here. So that's going to help you track. What's happening in the combust window, because once we start stacking on all these different forms of power, it's going to get very intense. It's going to happen very fast. So I wanted to change my UI around a little bit and make it as easy as possible. Everything you need to see is right here in the middle of the screen. Okay, to start out, we're going to show you the baseline Fire Mage. If we look at my character sheet right now, you will see the only essence I have slotted right now is Ripple and Space. You can't unslot your final essence, but Ripple and Space is going to do nothing for us, so we essentially don't have essences. All of my Azerite gear has no traits on it. I've reforged them all. They have no traits. I have absolutely no corruption, except for this piece. This is the only offhand piece I have, so I have 9% more mastery, but whatever. That's not going to affect gameplay. Everything else is just bare bones, stock stuff. Now take in mind that while I don't have any of the actual systems like Essences or Azerite or the Meccagon Bracers or any corruption, this is still a 475 geared mage. This is way more passive stats such as haste, crit, mastery, and verse than what a fresh max level Shadowlands character is going to have. So keep that in mind, that this character is actually going to be better than a Shadowlands character, even without any of the borrow power systems. So we're just going to jump right into it. I'm going to show you what a combustion looks like without any help from BFA systems whatsoever, just end game last content gear. We're using one on-use trinket. It's macroed in with combustion. It's just a damage amp. We've got one passive trinket, one on-use trinket. We can expect that that's going to be similar in Shadowlands. So here we go. We'll start out. We'll cast a Pyroblast. We'll hope that it crits. It doesn't. Rune of Power, Meteor, Combustion, Scorch, Fire Blast, Pyroblast. That's nice. 4 seconds left of Combustion, and we're just catching Scorch. Rune of Power again. Pyroblast. We'll finish out the rune. And on that last Fire Blast, we were at about 60k DPS. It's going to tick down now because of the Ignite. But by the time we finished DPSing, we were at 60k DPS. If we look at our damage breakdown, we have Pyroblast at number 1, Ignite dot number 2, Fire Blast, Meteor, Fireball, Trinket, Meteor Burn, and then Void Elf things and stuff. So that is the baseline mage. That's what it's going to look like in Shadowlands, except you're not going to have this much crit, this much haste, and this much mastery and verse. So that's the baseline Fire Mage. That's our baseline. That is the bedrock from which we are building on. Just keep this in mind. Now where I want to go from here, I want to follow the patch cycles of BFA. This is the baseline mage. First patch, and patch 8.1, we got Azerite traits. So let's go ahead and socket those in. Okay, I've now socketed in all of my Azerite traits. This is not 8.0, but 8.1 because you get 2 main traits on each piece of gear. But nonetheless, and the trait that you can see that we're stacking on every piece is this here, Blaster Master. This is the first building block on which the monstrous 8.3 Fire Mage was built. What is it? How does it work? It's a passive. Fire Blast increases your mastery by 391 for 3 seconds. This effect stacks, and it stacks up to 3 times. Now, if you'll see here, I cast a Fire Blast. I get this thing above my head here. This is my Blaster Master stacks. If you can see in my character screen here, I have 21.51% mastery. If I use a Fire Blast, Blaster Master kicks in. I now have 34% mastery, and then it falls off. We go back down to 20%. This stacks up to 3 times, so we go from 20% mastery to 34 to 48 to 61% mastery. Now this video assumes that you know the basics about Fire Mage and you know how it works, but just for those that aren't quite clear, I'm going to explain mastery real quick. What mastery is, your target burns for an additional % damage over 9 seconds of the total direct damage caused by your Fireball, Fire Blast, Scorch, Pyroblast, Meteor, Flame Strike. If this effect is reapplied, any remaining damage will be added to new Ignite. Every 2 seconds your Ignite spreads to another nearby target. What this means is, if I throw a Fireball at the target and it deals 20k damage, 20% of that damage is going to tick for another 9 seconds on the target, and it also spreads to other targets nearby. So if I have a Fireball, and just for easy math's sake, I fire a Fireball at the target, it does 100 damage. If I have 20% mastery, my Ignite is going to deal 20 damage over those 9 seconds. If I throw a Fireball at the target, it deals 100% damage, and I have 50% mastery, it's going to do 50 damage. If I throw a Fireball at the target, it does 100 damage, and I have 90% mastery, it's going to do 90 damage. Whatever damage your direct spells do, based on your mastery, tick on the target for 9 seconds. So what this means is that, as you saw in our Combust window, in order to get those instant cast Pyros, we're firing Fire Blast all the time. Well, what that means is, for the majority of the Combust window, we're sitting at 3%, or 3 stacks of Blaster Master, which is 60% mastery, which means Fireballs and Pyroblasts that would normally cause a mastery to tick for only 20% are now causing 60% of that damage to tick. That starts ramping up the damage you do in Combust, and even after Combust, you'll drop a second rune after the Combust ends, because you have all that damage ticking on the target, and the Rune of Power will amp that damage. Now, by itself, this doesn't really do much. It makes Fire, yeah, a bit more of an AoE Cleave spec. It's pretty strong stuff, but this was in an 8.0 and 8.1, and Fire wasn't played. It was played on, the only time Fire was played, in Uldir, Battle of Dazar'alor, and Crucible of Storm, was on the last bosses when the execute phase was long and required a lot of movement, and that was all off the back of Searing Touch talent. That had nothing to do with the actual mage. In fact, I guarantee you that if mages didn't have Arcane Intellect, none of the world first kills for those first 3 raids would have had a mage in them. Last boss, obviously for Fetid Devourer you would have had Arcane Mage or whatever, but last boss, Gahun, Jaina, and what was that guy's name? Unet or whatever his name was in the Crucible of Storm. If mages didn't have intellect, you wouldn't have seen any. Because if you go back and you watch those kills, there's only 1 mage in the group, and that's purely for Arcane Intellect. So by itself, yeah, it's strong. It makes the class a little bit stronger, gives us more AoE potential, but it doesn't really do it. And the crux of it comes down to the Combust hasn't changed. Let me show you. We start out with a Pyroblast. Hope it crits. Rune into Meteor. Didn't crit again. Pyroblast. Going through our stuff. Okay, there it is. We're scorching now because we have no more Fire Blasts. We get 1 extra. Rune after that. I have a habit of scorching, but I'll be casting Fireball just for the sake of this video. Finishing it off. And there we were at 75, 76k. So yeah, our damage is amped because of our Our Ignite is ticking harder, but it's still not where it needs to be. And the crux of it comes down to is that if you saw during both the first combust and this combust, after we blew through our Fire Blast charges, the last 5 seconds of the combustion, nothing happens. We just spam Scorch a couple of times and get like 2 extra Pyroblasts. Nothing happens in the last 4 seconds of the combust, and it really hampers the spec. That's not the way the spec was. This spec was rebuilt in Legion with Phoenix Flames as a baseline in mind, and that Phoenix Flames had 3 charges. It filled out those last 5 seconds of your combustion with more things to do other than just cast Scorch. Next, we're going to go into 8.2. What did they add in 8.2? Everybody knows your favorite system in the world. Don't you love farming them? It's essences. So, the very best essence for Fire Mage in 8.2 is this puppy right here. Why does it say Ripple in space? Memory of Lucid Dreams. Clear your mind with Atone yourself with a Heart of Azeroth, increasing your Fire Blast recharge rate by 100% in your Leech. Now those astute of you may be saying, hey, Fire Blast, that's what we use to get the Pyroblast for combustion, and it's also what stacks the Blaster Master trait. Correct. This was a game changer, although by itself it doesn't help that much. It does when combined with something else from 8.2, but we're not going to go there just yet. We're just going to show with essences. And I'm just going to... So, Memory of Lucid Dreams, it's the major. It's 2-minute cooldown. It syncs up perfectly with combustion. It's good. Now, the rest of them, I'm just going to throw in some passive stat procs. We got a haste proc from Essence of Focusing Iris there. We'll get some verse proc from that. And we'll just throw a Crucible of Flame in for some extra passive damage. So now you'll see on my UI, a new icon has appeared. This is the cooldown for Memory of Lucid Dreams. You don't have to worry about it too much, just letting you know that's what it is. So let's take a look at Combust with just the essences. The big system in 8.2 that was supposed to fix the problems with Azerite armor. Let's see how it goes. Start out with a Pyroblast, hope it crits. Go into a Memory. Rune. Meteor, it didn't crit. Fire Blast Scorch to get us going, and then we're Fire Blasting, Pyroblasting. Okay, this is a little better, but we still will last 2 or 3 seconds. We ran out of Fire Blast. And we dropped our Blaster Master stacks. It's not amazing, but it's definitely better. All of a sudden, we're spending more time doing things in Combust. And you see when we ended there, it was about 100k DPS, maybe a little more, a little less. And then we'll tick down. So our power is increasing substantially here. You can see it. But we're still not to the 8.3 Mage yet. We haven't even left 8.2 because there was another thing that was added to 8.2. Blizzard added an item. 2 items. I nearly forgot, but we're just going to cover this one right now. Blizzard added an item, a pair of bracers from Meccagon. Off the last boss, they have no stats on them. They have intellect and stamina, but they have no secondary stats. What they do have is an on-use effect. 2-minute cooldown. Hey, that syncs up really well with Combust and Memory of Lucid Dreams. What do? It reduces the remaining cooldown of your 3 most recently cast spells by 5 seconds. Oh! So what we can do is, we can equip that. And what we can do is, in the middle of the Combust, when we've run out of Fire Blast charges, we can use these bracers, and it's instantly going to give us back a couple charges of Fire Blast. That is going to help us bridge the gap of those last 2 or 3 seconds of Combust there to let us fire off a few more Pyroblasts and maintain those Blaster Master stacks. So as soon as our cooldowns come back here, I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay, so we're back. We're going to use we've got the Azerite armor now with the Blaster Master traits. We've got the essences with the Memory of Lucid Dreams. We've got our combustion, our meteor, all that, and we've got the Meccagon Bracers. Let's see what this looks like. We cast a Pyroblast, hope that it crits. Memory, it didn't. Into all this, Scorch again. Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Fire Blast, Pyroblast. We're out. We're going to use the bracers. Instantly, we're back up to 3. And look at that. Even out of the Combust, we still have some. And we can maintain our Blaster Master stacks into the next rune too. It's pretty impressive, and you can see we peaked at, I don't know what we peaked at there, but as we end, before we was at 120k, and those bracers alone gave us 25k damage. Approximately here and there. This is rough stuff, but you get what I'm saying. Now, that's not all 8.2 added, because Ashara, the last boss, added this little puppy right here. This is an unused trinket, Ashara's Font of Power. You probably know it. This is the thing where all the mages make the entire group do a 20-second pull timer so they can stick their hands in the air and wave them like they don't care. Channel latent magic for up to 4 seconds, increasing your primary stat by an amount. Don't flame my base heroic one. Okay, I run this every week. This is the best one I can get. But increases your primary stat by an amount. The duration is extended for each second spent channeling up to 30 seconds. Now, normally you would think, oh, this is just an unused trinket. What's the big deal? It's just like your gladiator's badge. The thing is, you can't. Unused trinkets are super powerful because you can line them up with your cooldowns. They're always rare. They're guaranteed. They're not random procs. And a lot of the time, they're big stat boosts, like the badge. What balances them is that you can't use two at the same time. If you use an unused trinket, if I use the badge, as you can see here, to buff myself with 3.5k intellect for 15 seconds, that puts Font on a 20-second cooldown. The buff only lasts 15 seconds, which means by the time this unused has fallen off, by the time my other unused trinket is ready to go, the buff from this one has fallen off. That's usually what happens with double unused trinkets, and that's why they're not really used. However, Ashara's Font of Power is a little bit special because you channel it for 4 seconds, it gives you primary stat, but for each second you spend channeling, it increases the duration up to 30 seconds. What this means is that you can use two unused trinkets and stack them on top of each other. So instead of just getting one boost to your primary stat, 3.5k from the badge, you can get the 3.5k from the badge and an extra 3k from the font. That's 6k intellect. That's almost half of my intellect from two trinkets during the combust window, which is where 90% of the mage's damage happens. This amps your spell power and your damage to absurd levels. Stacked on top of being able to maintain your Blaster Master stacks with that much mastery, gives you huge ignites, huge pyros, and it really amps your damage. So now you can see they're both off cooldown now. If you see on my UI, a new button has appeared, or a new icon has appeared. That's the Font of Power signaling it's off cooldown and ready to go. Also over here where you were seeing the badge buff before, you're now also going to see right below it the latent energy once we start channeling it. And now I'm going to show you what this looks like. This is full power 8.2 Fire Mage. I'm actually going to do a DBM pull timer here to help me do it. I'm going to set it for 25 just to make it easier. At 18 seconds, we're going to use our font. Here's 18. We'll start channeling the latent arcana. You see now we now have a primary stat buff for 30 seconds. While this is ticking down, our other on-use is coming off cooldown. At 5 seconds, we'll precast a Pyroblast. Hope it crits. Go into memory. It didn't crit. It's fine. Now we've got 2 on-uses going in our combust. Game's lagging a bit here, but we're going to keep going, maintaining our Fire Blast and our Blaster Master through the rune. We'll finish it out here. We're about 120, 125, 130k there by the end of the second rune. Obviously we peaked much higher. So that's full 8.2 Fire Mage. There's one more system that Blizzard added in their final patch, 8.3, and that of course is Corruption. And as you saw earlier, I already have some on this offhand here. It's the only offhand I have. It's the only one I could use. And the main number one corruption for Fire Mages is this corruption. Masterful. Increase the amount of mastery you gain from all sources by 1%, depending on the rank. This is good because obviously a lot of our damage comes from Ignite now. As you saw in the very first combust when I brought up the breakdown window, it was our number one damage source was Pyroblast, then Ignite. But because of Memory of Lucid Dreams, Blaster Master, and our ability to maintain that high level of mastery, Ignite has actually overtaken our Pyroblast quite significantly, even on single target. And Ignite's damage is based entirely off mastery. Not to mention, if there were other mobs spraying to this, it would be exponentially more damage than Pyroblast or any other spell. So the best source is mastery, because obviously it gives you more mastery on your gear, which means your ignites are bigger, which means your damage is bigger, yada yada. But that also includes mastery gained from Blaster Master. So if you saw earlier, I think it was 20% to like 30% when we made with one stack of Blaster Master. Let's put on all my mastery gear here. So let's stick on my actual gear here. This is my gear set I use to kill N'Zoth. And obviously in 8.3 we also had a new essence coming to the game, Breath of the Dying. It's the same thing as Crucible of Flame, basically. It's a damage proc, but it gives us 10 corruption resistance. So we're going to want to use that. So this is the gear set I use for my N'Zoth, Mythic N'Zoth progress right now. It's got 3 Masterful 2s, 1 Masterful 3, and then First and Infinite Stars, because that's all I've got. So now, my baseline before we put all this on was, what, 20%? Something like that? Now it's up to 30%, just by putting on all that Masterful gear. And obviously I have more gems or whatever with Mastery. But if we remember the jump from when we first put on the Azerite gear, when we saw what the Blaster Master did, the jump was from about 20 to 30% or so, if I remember correctly. Now we're at 30 baseline. What's one stack of Masterful, or Blaster Master with Masterful give us? We're at 50%. So before, the jump was about 10-15%. Now, the jump is about 20%. And I don't even have that much Masterful gear. Other mages have way more, because if you could buy it off the auction house, I'm not doing that. But so now, when we get to 3 stacks of Blaster Master, we start out at 33, 50%, 66%, 83% mastery. I think if we looked before, when we just had the Azerite gear, the most mastery we could get to is 60. Now we're at 80% mastery, which means 80% of all the damage we do to the mob is going to tick for another 9 seconds. That's basically like every Pyroblast you cast hits again. You're casting 2 Pyroblasts every time you cast one. It's insanity. Now, this is full power, final patch, BFA, 8.3 Fire Mage. Let's see what it looks like. DBM pull, 25. At 8 seconds, we're going to use the font. Now we're just waiting. You can see our trinket is slowly coming off cooldown. We've still got the buff at 20 seconds. 5 seconds. Pyroblast. Hopefully it doesn't crit, so it works with everything else we've done. It didn't. We'll go into this. We're doing our thing. Bracers. More Fire Blasts. The game is lagging again. Dude, this game is lagging so hard. Makes it really hard to test when you're doing. Makes it really hard to test, Blizzard, when the game's lagging like this. But we in there about 125. Now, if you've been a keen observer, you'll have noticed that the last big power spike that we got in our combust window was when we added the bracers. Yes, our damage has gone up from the font of power and the masterfuls and stuff, but not some net substantial jumps like it was from nothing to the Azerite gear, and from the Azerite gear to memory, and from memory to the bracers. That's our single target damage. But what happens, what's our single target? And while Fire Mage has pretty decent single target burst, as far as sustained single target damage, Fire Mage isn't that great. What makes them so crazy is their ability to turn that single target burst into massive AoE cleave. So if we go to another target over here, I assume these cleave. I haven't actually tested this, but I'm just going to hope that these cleave. We're going to damage this middle dummy, just like we were doing the boss dummy there, but he's going to have his 2 buddies for our Ignite to spread to. And you're going to see that our damage starts scaling exponentially. Let's do the DBM pull timer. I'm just going to do 22 seconds now. Make it a bit quicker. 18 seconds with font. Hopefully our Pyroblast doesn't crit so we can keep it the same as everything else. Hopefully the game doesn't lag on me. Our trinket is counting down. 5 seconds we'll cast the Pyroblast. Into the memory, into the rune, into the combust. Oh, it did crit. Okay, well. We're going in. Fireblast, Pyroblast. Game's lagging. Fireblast, Pyroblast. Bracers, Fireblast, Pyroblast, Fireblast, Pyroblast, Fireblast, Pyroblast. Finishing it out. Now you can see each of these mobs is ticking for like 100k each. Now it's going down a little bit, but... So we finished it out there. We're at 250k when we finished it out there. This is where the strength comes in. So as we've discussed and shown, most of the borrowed power for Fire Mage existed in 8.2. Only Masterful Corruption was added in 8.3. So as we've shown and discussed, most of the borrowed power from Fire Mages that made the spec viable and usable, and to actually complete the combust window without it feeling super cringe and having to cast Scorch 3 times, existed in 8.2, Ashar's Eternal Palace. Now it was at this point when raids started to bring more than one mage, because they actually were doing damage now, and they weren't just the Arcane Intellect bot. But they weren't as flavor of the month or insane as they are now. Well, why is that? We saw that Masterful isn't really that impactful. It's pretty impactful, but it's not as impactful as Lucid Dreams or the Bracers or Font of Power. So why in 8.3 all of a sudden did it go from a top tier class to S tier? And the reason for that is because in Ashar's Eternal Palace there were only 2 fights that lended themselves to the strength of the Fire Mage, the stacked AoE Cleave. That was Orgazoa and Zakul. They were the only 2 fights where the Ignite really got to ramp up and show its full potential. Even on Ashara, the final boss, where there's adds, it's not really stacked heavy AoE Cleave. It's mainly 2 target cleave. There's like 1 phase where a bunch of adds spawn in, but everyone just beamed those, so you never got to combust them anyways. So their single target burst damage was really good, and that was enough to bring them, but they weren't the monster they were because the fights weren't designed around it. In Nyalotha and 8.3, half of the bosses, 6 out of 12, are built perfectly for Fire Mage. They're a high health boss target on which we get to combust and stack a huge Ignite. They then spawn a bunch of little adds that the Ignite can cleave to, and we AoE down. On top of that, all those bosses that are built for Fire Mage happen to be the hardest bosses in the raid. N'Zoth, Carapace, Il'gynoth, Rodin, Vexiona, Hivemind. Now, obviously not Hivemind, but you know, N'Zoth, Carapace, Il'gynoth, Rodin, Vexiona, that's basically hardest fight, second hardest fight, third hardest fight, fourth hardest fight, fifth hardest fight in Nyalotha. And they are all the best fights for Fire Mage. Stacked on that, we add Masterful Corruption in, so our Ignites are now bigger, and Blizzard finally gives us fights for Ignite to spread and actually do what it's meant to, and all of a sudden we have this absolute AoE Cleave burst single target monster. But if we go back and we take away 8.3, oh no, no corruption. Just put on a regular piece of gear. Oh, no corruption. Let's put on a regular piece of gear. Oh, no corruption. Put on a regular piece of gear. Oh, no corruption. Put on a regular piece of gear. Oh, no corruption. Put on a regular piece of gear. Obviously, that's the only piece of gear I have beside this Twilight one, so. And then 8.2. Oh, let's take away the font. That's not a thing anymore. Let's just put a bland proc trinket in there. Oh yeah, bracers. Gotta get them out of here. Oh yeah, these essences, they gotta go. Gotta get those essences out of here. So let's see, memory, gone, gone, gone. We'll just throw Ripple and Space in here. Oh, the Azerite traits? Those are no good. Let's get rid of them. The necklace is gone. We don't have Azerite traits anymore. What do you need the necklace for? Oh, okay. This is a baseline Fire Mage. Let's see what it looks like. Pyroblast. I went to press memory there. I didn't even have it. And we're out of Fire Blast. 3 seconds into Combust, we're out of Fire Blast. Boom, boom. Scorch to finish it off. Oh, we peaked at a solid 65k there. Beautiful. Granted, we don't have the intellect and other stats from these pieces of gear, but you get what I'm saying. The spec doesn't work without all these sources of borrowed power. In conclusion, we see now that things that enable Fire Mage to be the powerhouse that it is has very little to do with the base spec and everything to do with the multitudes of borrowed power BFA gave us. But if we go back to the baseline Mage the same way that we did at the start of BFA coming out of Legion, we see it's an actually unworkable broken spec. On top of losing all these things that make the spec good, Blizzard saw fit to nerf Ignite, both in its ability to auto-spread and in the target cap of the spell. This is a massacre on two fronts that will doom to spec for the first half of Shadowlands until we get some more borrowed power that Blizzard decides to shit out in patch 9.2 or whatever, just as it did at the start of BFA. Side note, why does Ignite have a target cap? Mages are the AoE class, Blizzard. Have you not played Classic? Mages are the AoE class. Okay. The most frustrating thing about this is that you got it right before. At the start of Legion, the spec just worked.
And again, it just works.
The things you need to do to fix this spec are so simple, and Blizzard just seems to refuse to listen. Look at the baseline Legion Fire Mage. Make Phoenix Flames. This spell that we haven't spec'd all expansion that you saw fit, we don't need that baseline, we'll make it a talent. Make Phoenix Flames baseline again. Let Ignite spread passively instead of having to spread it with Fire Blast, which is another change they made in Shadowlands. Ignite no longer spreads itself, you have to spread it with Fire Blast. Fire Blast we use to generate Hot Streak, Blizzard. And it's fire! I am machine gun fireball man over here, chucking huge Molotov cocktails at the mobs. That's not a controlled burn. Okay, we're going to control burn, we're going to burn off this little bit. No, this is a cataclysm. This is Australia in 2020, okay? So make Phoenix Flame baseline. Just let Ignite spread without Blaster Master and the massive Mastery Amp corruptions. It's not a problem. It's just not. And then this 60 talent tier needs work. Flame on, sure enough, fine. If you want to keep this, sure. But the other talents have to compete with it. Alexstras's Fury needs the Legendary Helm from Legion baked into it. It needs range, and it needs damage buff. Just a critical strike and contributing to Hot Streak isn't enough to make this talent usable. I don't want to blink in and Fire Blast a mob for less damage than a Fireball's going to do. Okay? I want to be able to sit back here, fire off that giant Fire Breath, like a bunch of imps spawn or something. I fire off that giant Fire Breath, they all get disoriented, it does massive damage, it crits on all of them, it gives me a Hot Streak, throw a Fire Blast afterward, drop a Flame Strike on them, that's cool stuff. And then you need to come up with a new talent to fit in this row that's going to compete with Flame On. Alexstras's Fury, if you think back to Legion, when you paired it with the Legendary Helm, it actually competed with Flame On in mass AoE situations. Things like the Portal Keeper from Antorus. When she spawned all those imps, I loved when those imps spawned and they were all casting and you needed someone to interrupt them and stun them, because if they got the cast off they were going to nuke somebody down. I love just sitting at the back and firing off that giant Dragon's Breath, critting them all, doing massive damage, disorienting them, giving me a hot streak. It was great. And ta-da! We do those simple changes. Phoenix Flames baseline, Ignite just spreads by itself, and the 60 talent tier gets reworked. You do those 3 changes, and the class just works.
And again, it just works.
Now this last little bit, I want to respond to some criticism here that I expect is going to be coming. So first off the bat, Covenant abilities. You're not taking into account the Covenant abilities. The Covenant abilities are fix-it. No, we've seen all of the Covenant abilities for the Mage, and some of them are really cool, but they're not going to fix any of the problems that this spec currently has. Radiant Spark, the carrying ability. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's interactive. Each spell you do after it ramps the damage and that cool stuff, but you're just going to use it before combust. Like, it's a fire and forget. There's nothing to really think about. The Deathborn Maldraxxus one that turns you into a really cool Skelly Boy. Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool. But you're not, it's just a damage cooldown, and you're not even going to stack it with combust, because it amps Fireball. You don't cast Fireball in combust. What will probably end up happening is you'll do your combust thing or whatever, and then in that second rune that you saw me keep dropping, you'll probably prop Deathborn and throw off some fireballs there. And that'll probably be pretty good, but it doesn't fix any of the actual gameplay problems with the spec. The Twisted Mirrors, or whatever it's called, the Vindreth ability, you're probably not even going to cast that on a lot of bosses, because it does literally nothing. It's just a PvP talent. So that's out the window. Now, the Arden Wield one, I forget what it's called, is actually pretty cool and kind of interesting. You channel it, it does damage to things around you, and while you're channeling that, it's like an evocation for your cooldowns. It reduces the cooldown of all your spells. That's pretty cool. That could make maybe like a kindling build with high crit or something be kind of cool. But you have to remember, you're then playing Arden Wield, and who the fuck wants to do that? So that's out the window. Now the next thing I'm sure someone's going to say is, you haven't seen the whole picture yet. There's still soulbinds to come. There's still legendaries to come. Listen, you're right. Those things might be cool, and they might add some cool things to the spec. However, I don't think we should have to rely on yet another round of borrowed power bolt-ons to make the spec, to Frankenstein the spec back into a working order. It should just function at the baseline, and then we could build cool things on top of that. The cool things that we build on top shouldn't be fixing the foundation. We should have a solid foundation to begin with. And finally, the thing that I've heard a lot, which is really retarded, fire is never good at the start of an expansion. Do you not remember Legion? Do you remember going into the Mage Order Hall and seeing 30,000 fiery orbs floating above people? That was before everyone had their legendaries too, their Pyroblast Bracers. It still just worked by itself. I didn't get my Pyroblast Bracers until Tomb of Sargeras, and I still played fire for the first 2.5 tiers. But up until then, even without the Pyroblast Bracers, the spec worked. So that's the end of this video. I get a little passionate about these things. I really like the class, and Blizzard really looks like they're butchering it yet again in the alpha, just like they did with BFA. And I just don't want it to go down like this again. So hopefully this was an entertaining and informative video. Hopefully maybe someone from Blizzard sees this. I don't know, but we'll see you next time.